This is Wildcat Country.
Larson tipped it. Love has it. Lewis slams it, and Arizona wins it.
The inside scoop on the Arizona Wildcats.
It's Gunnar Maldonado. He's got blockers. Touchdown, Arizona.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to bear down.
Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country presented by Harrah's Auction Casino. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale. And, it's typical Arizona when we expect one team to lose, one team to win, and it's the complete opposite, Shane.
Yeah. Our guy, Red Hat Cat on X, who's one of my favorite follows, make sure to follow him if you're an Arizona fan. He actually asked the question, would you have traded a football win for a basketball win? And actually, to think about it, eventually I said no. Because a basketball win, it would have been nice, especially, losing to those Wisconsin people, but it is what it is. It's not that big a deal. Football, one win is a lot bigger, and at least they have a chance to get to a bowl game. So was that going to happen? The road is very uphill, but it was nice to get the monkey off the back, especially because after having a 9-game winning streak, the last thing you want to do is have a losing streak that long or longer. So nice to see the football program win, even though it was against a lousy team.
I think I would have traded it, actually. And This is kind of like a premature buy or sell. Yeah, I think I would have. And, listen, I was there. I'm glad I got to see it took
you
me
were
3
rewarded.
hours.
Yeah, you were rewarded for the drive. Yep.
Yeah, it took me 3 hours to get down there. It was a pain in the ass. And then, finally got there, and, it was a chilly night. But yeah, it was fun to see a win. They thoroughly dominated. I was able to leave middle of the fourth quarter.
Were there 20,000 fans there? 25?
I would take the under on any number that you probably give me.
Mm.
Heading into the fourth quarter, I'm pretty sure, where you count the lights in the stadium when they do like the put on your phone and they do.
Oh yeah.
There were under 100 people with lights.
It was really, really dark, is what you were saying.
Yeah.
There might be more people in McKale on Friday.
Oh, Shane, there were no more than 5,000 people going in the fourth quarter of that game.
Wow.
In the stands. And anybody that was there, if you could disagree, literally, I was going to start counting on 1, 2, 3, 4.
Coming off a 10-win season, that's rough, man. I get it, but it's rough.
It's rough. Well, there's a lot to talk about this week, and we have the voice of the Wildcats, Brian Jeffries, joining us in the second segment. But first, it is time for our weekly fun segment. It is Shane's Standouts. What do we have this week?
Well, we're 4 days removed from the football win as we record this. So, we could talk about the accolades that Genesis Smith and Tyler Loop have racked up, and deservedly so. Genesis Smith, co-defensive player of the week in the Big 12. Tyler Loop, 61 yards, was it?
62.
62. I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to shortchange him. Semifinalist for the Lou Groza. But I also want to mention Dalton Johnson. He forced his third fumble of the season late in that win over Houston, which Arizona recovered deep in their own territory to make sure Houston would not score a touchdown in that game. If you remember, he had a pretty big forced fumble in the Alamo Bowl last year, too. He leads the team with 70 tackles this year. And, in a year where we've had so many injuries on both sides of the ball, and including defense, he's really been the one constant. He keeps working hard, making big plays. I think he deserves a shout out. I absolutely love the guy and hope we get he'll be a senior next year. Hopefully decides to come back to Arizona because I think he's fantastic.
All right, I want you to pause right there. First of all, the Genesis Smith, was probably one of the best halves of defensive football I've seen in a long time. He was flying. Tackles for loss, interceptions. He played incredible football in the first half. I want to point that out. Tyler Loop's field goal was on the opposite end of where my tickets are. I think it was closer to where Barrett Baker sits.
It's from the other side of the logo. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was, and I'm wondering, what is Brent doing here? I know the kid has a big leg, but what? And he drilled it with room to spare. And just the reaction, it was like, all right, finally, we have something to cheer about after, since at Arizona Stadium, we basically haven't had anything to cheer about since the first game. Because the NAU game was bad. And then they lost every other game. So, to finally, you're like, okay. Now, the first touchdown pass from Fafita to McMillan was awesome, but that Loop field goal is something that I won't forget. It was really cool to see. Congrats to Tyler Loop and Genesis Smith.
Yeah.
All right, continue.
Yeah, well, and McMillan should have had another catch too that was ruled incomplete.
Oh, it was an incredible one-hander.
And then Loop had another ho hum 51-yard kick as well, I think. So, yeah, moving on. Volleyball teams won 3 in a row, including a pair of road wins last week. Senior Chiari Roby had a total of 19 kills and 12 blocks in those games, including a season high 9 blocks in the win at Cincinnati. So a shout out to Chiari. And then I want to mention Kadeem Carey, who scored a touchdown in the Toronto Argonauts Grey Cup Championship in Vancouver last weekend over the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Kadeem had over 1,000 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns for the Argos this season. Not an easy feat at age 32 for a running back, regardless of what country you're playing in. Kadeem's former teammate at Arizona, Jaron Kreiner, won a Grey Cup with the Ottawa Red Blacks 8 years earlier. So congrats to Kadeem. If you go to the CFL page on X, you'll find a cute video of Kadeem and his kids throwing confetti after the win. Then you'll see another video of him drinking champagne out of the Grey Cup. So very happy for him and his family. That's what I got this week, Eric.
I'll tell you what, Kadeem was one of my favorite Arizona offensive players. Just was so much fun to watch. That Colorado game, I think it was 2013. He had almost 300 yards rushing. It was just always a great player to watch. I wish he had stuck around another year at Arizona so we could have seen him as a senior. I get why he went pro, but I'm really happy to see that, at 32, he's still playing and playing really well for Toronto. So good for him. Had a nice, he played a little bit in the NFL and had a nice CFL career.
He's had a good CFL career with Calgary and then with Toronto. So I know it's not the NFL, but glad to see he's doing well.
All right. It is time for Buy or Sell, presented by our friends at Ice Shaker. Go to iceshaker.com, use promo code Wildcat Country, capital W, capital C, and get $5 off your first purchase. After you do that, please make sure to fill out the post-purchase survey. This is holiday time. Black Friday is coming up next week. You want to buy something for your friends and or family and or friends, should I say. And the ice shakers are an excellent gift for those who are active, especially. Or if you want to you go out and about, you want to put some coffee in there like Shane has, play some golf like me, put some water in there. They are multifaceted. All right, Shane, number 1 in Buy or Sell. What do you make of the rumors that Brent Brennan will likely be out if Arizona does not win out? It's not necessarily a buy or sell, but we got to talk about it.
Yeah, and I don't have an inside source. But as I said before, and I still believe, there's no way Brent Brennan would be dismissed after one season if Dave Hickey were still the athletic director.
Agreed.
But he's not. So, yeah, I think it's a possibility. And I mean, I guess I'm going to say I'm not surprised that it could be true. How's that? I mean, I'm hedging as much as I can, I guess. But it's also possible a decision's been made one way or the other, regardless of how the season ends. That's entirely possible. However, if his fate is really contingent upon the outcomes of these last 2 games, are 2 wins the only acceptable result? For example,
yes.
Well, okay. You answered already. Good. I'll share my thought. For example, if Arizona loses a tough, hard-fought game at TCU, like they look better than they did, infinitely better than they did against UCF and BYU and some other teams. If they lose a close, hard-fought game at TCU, and then they come home and they upset ASU, and yes, it would definitely be an upset at this point, whether we like it or not, would that be enough? I think Desiree Reed-Francois may have made up her mind either way already. I think there's a good chance that's happened. I don't know how much you're going to put in these last 2 games after you've seen 10 already. I think a lot of fans have already made up their minds about how they feel about Brent Brennan too. But if his fate is still up in the air, then I think it's not only the outcome of these final 2 games that really matter, but how competitive the team is as well.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. I think the fact of the matter is, if the money is there, and I don't know anything other than what we read from certain sources who do a fine job on the internet, that there are rumors that the money may or may not be there, depending on who you talk to. If it is, I think she'll pull the trigger. With that said, you better get it right the next time. Like, she better be 100% sure, because there's no, going back. Once you hire the next coach, he's here 3+ years. Like, you're not. You better get it right. And I mean, odds are next year for Arizona football, there's unless they were to have a significant influx in the transfer portal, it's not going to be great. I don't think there's much to like. I mean, if Noah sticks around, sure, but they need a lot of help. I mean, this team was painfully thin with some of the losses in the offseason, and they did not fill those gaps, Shane.
I think, ironically, even though the win over Houston stopped the bleeding, I think that game may have hurt more than anything, just if you, because we already talked about the attendance or lack thereof. When, if you're athletic director and you see that many seats empty,
Mhm.
it's just, your first thought is just, you're just bleeding money. You're not making the kind of revenue that you need to. And so, the biggest thing to fill those seats is to win. I know it's tougher and tougher for Arizona football to fill those seats for whatever reason, but even when they do win, but when you see that many empty seats, I think that might prompt her to pull the trigger more than anything. But again, who knows? Maybe the decision has been made to retain him. Maybe it really depends on these last two games, and we'll have to wait and see.
So I was talking to somebody in the offseason who was in the athletic department, and they basically implied that Brent Brennan was a quick choice. Once Jed left, okay, we know Brent is
Yeah.
we're gonna hire him. This is our guy. We've already interviewed him before. In hindsight, knowing that if they didn't do that, a lot of the big players, were going to leave. In hindsight, should Arizona regret that move, or hey, they did the best they could. They kept most of the team here, and it just worked out the way it worked out.
I think moving fast was a good idea. You can make the argument that Brent wasn't the right guy, but I mean, they were. He was a close. It was a close pick, I think, a few years back between Jed and Brent, and they knew him, and they wanted to move fast, and especially with the transfer portal as it is, knowing it was going to be open either way after a head coaching change. I think they wanted to move quickly. I don't think it was a reckless move because they already knew Brent. You can debate whether it was the right move or not, and obviously, probably 90% or more of Arizona fans at this point would say it wasn't. But I don't think acting fast in that case, I don't think was necessarily a bad decision. You can debate on whether he was the right coach, but I think moving fast to secure your roster, even though I think sometimes you got to think more long term than that. I understand it, and I understand why DFAQ did it.
Yeah, but the fact is, if you had lost the majority of the roster, I mean, there's so many season tickets that would have been canceled right off the bat.
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, the attendance probably would be about where it's now anyway. And if you have to start over from scratch and you win 3 or 4 games, the fans are going to be more patient. They're going to be like, okay, we've been down this road before. Let's see what happens next year. I think a lot of the frustration with fans over a 4-6 record at this point is the expectations were a lot higher. And again, that's because Brent Brennan and his staff were so successful in bringing back so many of the top guys. And so it doesn't feel the same way as it did in previous rebuilds for that reason.
The whole thing is unfortunate. We talked about, I think we had Blair Willis on and Barrett Baker before the season. We asked them both, what's the worst case scenario here? And nobody saw 4-8 or even 5-7. We said maybe 7-5, maybe 6-6. None of us saw it being this. I mean, you couldn't. We thought the pieces in place, and unfortunately, we were mistaken. And it just, I kind of have this perception, and I don't know this, Shane, but I wanted to get your read on it, that Jed was out there and put himself out in the public eye and had all these NFL connections and people coming. It feels like Brent Brennan behind the scenes just isn't working as hard as Jed Fish. Could you buy into that or no?
Just from what I know, I'll sell it. I just don't know about that. I mean, the NFL connections. I mean, you can't blame Brennan for that. He just doesn't have what Jed has. No, very few coaches do. I do remember before Jed coached a game at Arizona, we had Wilton Spate on, a quarterback who Jed coached at Michigan, and he told us about how there was one week where Michigan won a big game, and then Jed had him back in his office at like 5 a.m. the next morning to go over like 20 new plays for the next game. So that stuck with me. Now, does Brennan do that? Does he do the same thing, or does his staff do that? I don't know. And of course, Jed wasn't the head coach at the time. I know Jed woke up early, and I don't know if Brent wakes up as early. I don't know all of that. I do know he's put together a pretty impressive recruiting class for next year, all things considered, especially with the struggles that the teams had this year. At this moment, they're actually tied with ASU for the number 36 overall class nationally in the Rivals team rankings.
I mean, they're losing guys, as we know. We lost Terry Shelton.
But that always happens. They're going to lose some. They're probably going to gain some. If they keep bleeding guys, then I agree with you. But they're still top 40. So look, we can debate the competence of Brent Brennan and the coaching staff. Is he in over his head? And the competence of this staff relative to Jed Fish and his staff. I don't think it's fair to say he doesn't work as hard. I don't know behind the scenes, but I got to think that if you're a head coach at any level, you got to work your butt off as much as anyone else does.
And I think the key, Shane, I mean, the coaching obviously is something. We know that. Yeah. You got to recruit. And I think it was Rich Rod's downfall because Rich Rod's a hell of a coach. Rich
Mike
Rod's
Stoops
probably
as
the
well.
right. Mike Stoops could recruit. I don't know how good of a coach he was. Mike
Yeah,
Stoops had great coordinators in the end. I mean,
he,
he ended up having two guys that are still coaching as head coaches in college football and have had
that's
major
true.
success in Mark Stoops and Sonny Dykes.
Yeah.
But Mike Stoops himself is not the tactician. More along the
No.
Brent Brennan. If you're not going to be the tactician because he doesn't call plays or anything like that,
Right.
you gotta seriously recruit. Jed was all about recruiting. I mean, the play calling was what it was, but he brought in the players. I mean, this team is loaded with draft picks. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, and I that is the one concern above the coaching that I have with Brent Brennan. Obviously, there were holes last year, and they weren't filled. And in this offseason. And do I really trust him this offseason to be able to go out and fill those holes? I mean, I have some questions about, and I'm not going to sit here and bash Brent Brenner. He's a great guy. We've enjoyed having him on this program. I would love to see him succeed. But yeah, I'm demoralized, and I've been wrong about the situation from the start. I've been hyping him up. At some point, I mean, beating a Houston team that looked like a high school team doesn't really tell me a lot. And
No.
beating a Utah team that was one step above a high school team on offense doesn't really tell me a lot.
Yeah, I guess the reason for hope going into the last couple of games is, I mentioned that I feel like a lot of things have gone wrong early in these games for Arizona, and I think that feeling of here we go again kind of creeps in. Now that Arizona's kind of got that monkey off its back and it's finally won a game, even if against a bad team, maybe things start to tick up. And so we'll have to wait and see. I expect, I don't know what's going to happen, but I would expect, and I think it's reasonable to expect Arizona to give TCU a tough game. They should, based on the level of talent they have, even with the injuries. Will that happen? I don't know. If they look just like they did against UCF and against BYU and some of these other games on Saturday, I think we have a major problem. Yes.
All right, I want to talk a little basketball here. We saw what happened against Wisconsin. We kind of, dodged around that, and it was not great. I mean, and we'll talk to Brian Jeffries about what he saw in that particular game. Buy or sell, Shane. Arizona basketball will not give up 100 points in a game again this season.
Yeah, I'm going to reluctantly buy that. I think they'll certainly give up 80 plus and probably 90 again, considering the level of competition they have this year. This would be an easier buy if Arizona was still in the Pac-12. My big takeaway from the Wisconsin game is I think it was just kind of had a weird clunky feel that Arizona couldn't overcome. It was tough. I mean, it's tough on the road, tough place to play. And then you just had one whistle after another. The officials, with that meme, get in there and make it about you. They took that to heart.
Yeah.
Caleb Love got into some early foul trouble in particular. And I think when your game plan sort of goes out the window that early and it just has a weird cadence, especially away from home, I think it's very difficult to overcome. Certainly they need to play better, especially defensively. They need to shoot better from outside. But as of now, I look at this game as more of an isolated incident rather than a realistic look into how this team is going to play the rest of the season.
Yeah, this is a tough question to answer because you never know an overtime game.
That's
in
true.
In a 40-minute game, I don't believe Arizona gives up 100 points again. And I think the best two chances of a team scoring 100, in my opinion, are Friday with Duke and next week against presumably Gonzaga if Arizona gets that far. So I'm going to sell that. I think they'll give up over 90 again, but I don't think you're going to see a debacle like that. From what we saw. Number 4, Shane, or number 3, I guess I should say. Friday night's game, as non-conference games go, this is a must-win for the Wildcats. Tommy Lloyd has never lost 2 games in a row at Arizona. So buy or sell, this is a must-win.
No, I'll sell it. It's not. A loss to Duke would be tough to swallow, obviously, especially at home, and especially because Arizona's dominated Duke over the last decade plus. And certainly, you talked about it before the season, how many losses can Arizona fans take? And we haven't even gotten to the conference play yet. But Duke is a very good team. Arizona obviously has things to work on. It might take more than one game for them to sort things out. My perspective is as well, we've been able to enjoy so many big regular season wins over the last 10 to 15 years. Arizona may be the overall the NCAA regular season champions over the last decade. And while beating Duke again would be awesome, I dislike them as much as anyone. I would trade it for a deep run in March in a heartbeat. I realize it doesn't have to be an either or situation. Okay. But if Arizona loses again on Friday, I'm not panicking. It's a long season. And unlike years past, Arizona is going to have plenty of chances for very high quality wins, not just at the end of 2024, but all the way up to March in 2025.
All right. Is this a must win? Probably not. So I'll sell that, but it's somewhat close. I mean, can Arizona fans, and I warned them, and some guy called me in our YouTube comments an idiot when I said Arizona's going to lose 8-9 games this year. No, you're an idiot. There's one. Yeah. There's one. And if they lose to Duke, there's two. And Gonzaga's pretty good. They're top 3, I think, something like that.
It should be UCLA and Phoenix, but
they should, right. But I mean, you conceivably 3 losses in the non-conference, and then, obviously the Big 12 is tough. Now, it's toughening them up. And I thought, the Wildcats, the free throw shooting concerned me more than anything that I saw the other night. Jaden Bradley missing, 5 free throws, something like that.
I can't imagine that's going to continue, though.
I mean, yeah, the officiating made the game fluky, so I'm not panicking about it. Yeah. And Brian will, maybe put some perspective on it in the next segment. I'm concerned. This one, I'm a little concerned in that I'd like to see him win this game, and then the Wisconsin game gets wiped out. Then we're not talking about it anymore.
Right.
You go and you sweep Duke. And it's not like Duke has a lot of players who were on the team last year. And by the way, Caleb Love does kind of own Duke.
He does.
So just want to point that out. All right. A bonus one. This is kind of an interesting one. So TNT is trading the rights, or Turner Sports trading the rights of Inside the NBA, which is the best sports show on television, to ESPN in exchange for Big 12 football and basketball games. So fair trade, Shane, ASU and U of A games for Inside the NBA. Buy or sell?
Well, first of all, I'm either going to have to get rid of Fubo and do like YouTube TV because Fubo doesn't have TNT.
Is that right? Wow. Yeah,
right.
You got to get rid of it.
I've had to subscribe to HBO Max to get them, because you cut the cord and then you have to subscribe to like 7 different services to watch all sporting events now. It's ridiculous. But beyond that, Inside the NBA, that's the winning side. I'm not a big NBA fan anymore. I barely recognize the game from my childhood. I can go full get off my lawn on that stuff, but I won't. But Inside the NBA, like you said, it's the single best, or at least most popular pre and post game show out there. Nothing compares to it. If it was Inside the NBA for the SEC, then we could have a discussion. But for the Big 12, I don't think so.
Okay, fair enough. I think it's a great move for Turner. They're losing obviously NBA rights, but to get more college sports now, they're subleasing a couple of games from ESPN college football playoff games. But I think to get the Big 12, and especially some of these games that would normally be on ESPN Plus and now that are going to be on TNT and TBS, I think it's a great move. I mean, they were going to Inside the NBA. It's a way to keep it on the air, and it's a way to also expand their college sports presence and give fans a linear option outside of just watching it on their computers for some of these games, such as Arizona-TCU on Saturday. That would be the type of game that's going to end up on TNT. So I'm all for this. I'm buying the heck out of it, and good trade for all sides. Coming up next, first of all, Wildcat Country is brought to you by Harrah's Auction Casino. Bear down, Wildcat fans, because it's time to spin to win up to $6,000 at Harrah's Auction Casino. It's easy. Just sign up for Caesars Rewards, play your favorite slots, and earn entries to spin the wheel for your chance to win up to $6,000 in free slot play. What's even better, you'll get $10 in free slot play just for signing up. And the more you play, the more entries you'll receive. So get ready to spin to win only at Harrah's Auction Casino. Play for all. All right, now, coming up next, Brian Jeffries, the voice of the Wildcats, here on Wildcat Country.
When you're on the golf course and it's 100 degrees outside, you know what's great? The ice shaker, which keeps your water cold.
You heard the man. Get your custom Arizona Wildcats ice shaker now at iceshaker.com.
Shane, always glad to have our friend, the voice of the Wildcats, one of the great ones, Brian Jeffries, back on with us here on Wildcat Country. All right, Brian, you were on the road last week in Madison, and I could hear as I was driving from Scottsdale to Tucson for the football game, I could hear the frustration in your voice in terms of the officiating. And I don't want to blame any loss strictly on the officiating, but it didn't sound too good. how would you contribute that to Arizona's loss the other night?
Yeah, I'm not going to blame the officials for the Wildcats' loss, but I will say this, that they whistled 63 fouls in that game, or 62. I lost track at one point. I think if once you get over 40, I think that's way too many. And they were over 60 in that game. And really, it was only one foul difference between Arizona and Wisconsin. So again, the official didn't cost Arizona the game, but it was just difficult because neither team could really get into any type of rhythm. And the Wildcats, that's what they play with. They play with a rhythm. They play with a pace, and they could never get it going. And Wisconsin got to the free throw line for again their benefit, and most of the fouls Arizona committed, it seemed like, were when Wisconsin was shooting the ball, and so they were really getting and one or getting a two-shot foul, and Arizona was getting fouled on common fouls and didn't have as many opportunities. Didn't make as many free throws, obviously, but yeah, you just hate to see games like that. And I know for Wisconsin, it's a great win. They deserve it. But you just wish the officials would understand to let them play. And I'll go back to the two regular season games played in Tucson, and those were Big 12 officials. And this is our first season, of course, with Big 12 officials. And I walked away from those two games thinking, wow, this is going to be great because they let the guys play. There was a lot of physical contact in both those games, and they let them play. And in this game, they didn't let them play. And so, again, Wisconsin, great game, great win, and they should have a pretty good season. And the Wildcats, you learn things in those losses. And so hopefully they learn some things. And now we'll see about this East Coast school that's coming in Friday night.
Yeah, and it's probably counterintuitive for Wildcat fans, but it's kind of one of those things where you want to sort of root for Wisconsin the rest of the way because you want it to look like the best loss it can be. This is not really the most pertinent question, but I just got to ask you, Brian, since you were there. Wisconsin fans storming the court, beating a team that they beat to get to the Final Four 2 years in a row. What did you think? Were you surprised? I was a little surprised.
Oh, I was totally surprised. The student section was to our right in the end zone, and I hadn't even given thought to it. I didn't even look over there. Just all of a sudden, the horn sounds, and here they come. Thankfully, the security staff was ready, and they kept all the Arizona players away from that bedlam. Yeah, in November, you storm the court. I don't know. You've been there, you've done that.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me now this week, they said, hey, if Arizona beats Duke, will the Arizona fans storm the court? I hope not.
No.
I hope Arizona wins the game, but I hope they don't do that because you don't. And so Wisconsin's been a really good program for a long time. And
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, they had a good reason to celebrate, so let them have it, and we'll see how their season goes from here.
No, you take it as a compliment, I guess. So looking ahead to Duke, the second part of the home and home, Cooper Flags looks like a matchup nightmare. Big game. Arizona got not a quick turnaround, but you go from one big game on the road to another big game at home. McKale's going to be rocking. What are some of the big factors you're expecting to see in that game as far as who wins?
Well, I think how Arizona defends the size, the length that Duke has. I mean, they start 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", 6'9", 7'2", and the Wildcats don't start that type of length. And so, how does Arizona defend that? I think that's going to be a huge question in my mind going into that ball game. Both teams have now suffered a loss, which might be good for both teams, and so they're even up. Somebody said to me, gee, I wish Duke wouldn't have lost. We wanted to come in unbeaten, and then Arizona loses. And I thought, okay, well, now you got them even Steven for both of them. So, Duke's a young team. I would look back at that game last year down in Durham, and there's only one starter back from each team. And so they're brand new clubs. You really can't base too much on that. I do remember Arizona had a decisive advantage on the glass in that game, and I think that's going to be another big key because, with Duke's size like that, you would expect them to be a very good rebounding team. So how can Arizona counter that? That's probably the first thing we'll find out on Friday.
Yeah, I'm curious, is Arizona, they've never lost 2 games in a row under Tommy Lloyd. How do you bounce back from a game where you gave up 103 points or whatever to a team that you don't really expect to score more than 80 at most. I mean, how does that defensively? You saw them play so well against Old Dominion, and then they go do that against Wisconsin. What do you expect to see from them defensively against Duke?
Yeah, I think that's another major question mark going into the ball game. Wisconsin got a lot of their points on the free throw line, as we talked about. So you hope it doesn't turn into that type of ball game. But yeah, that one thing that Tommy Lloyd was really stressing since practice started over a month ago, and that is we've got to be a tougher defensive team. And if you look at Arizona's defensive numbers the last couple of years, they've kind of gone the way you don't want to see them. And so going into the Big 12, it was very important, and I think it is very important that they find their defensive signature, because if they're going to challenge for the Big 12 championship, I think they're going to have to be a really good defensive team. And so, this week is going to be a major test in that department, because Duke is an outstanding offensive team. And so how does Arizona, I don't want to say hold them down, because I think both teams, again, if the game's called well, it's going to be a high-scoring game, and both teams are going to be up and down. But you're at home, you got to play good defense, and I think that's the stress in practice this week.
Let's switch to football. It has not been the best year, we know that. But the Wildcats, I know you unfortunately were not calling the game. Brody did a fantastic job on Friday calling it. It was crazy, as I mentioned to you before we came on, just his cadence, how much it sounds like yours. So certainly you taught him quite well. Your thoughts on what to expect over the last couple weeks here from this football team? I mean, they look like they didn't quit on Friday against Houston, albeit Houston was also pretty dreadful themselves. What do you expect that we'll see in terms of effort level against TCU and ASU?
Well, the ASU game kind of is a season in itself. And I think it doesn't matter what the team's records are at that point. Arizona could lose to TCU and they could beat ASU. That's just the way the rivalry is gone. Effort, there's no question about effort when you get into the Territorial Cup. So this week's game, I think, is going to be the one we're going to find out. They have practiced really well throughout the season. And, most people don't get to see that. And I go and I'll watch them, and there's energy, there's enthusiasm, there's togetherness, there's a bond between them. You would never know that they were on a 5-game losing streak going into that game against Houston. And so that's always given me pause to think, okay, they could turn this thing around. Now, turning around this season means they have to win their last 2 games. And you have to do it on the road against TCU, and that's a very good team. I mean, they're the best passing team in the Big 12. Arizona's pass defense is going to be, on major alert. I asked Brant on Monday night, I said, you played a lot of dime defense out of necessity. They played 6 defensive backs on a lot of games here after all the injuries set in. And could that be a plus now? Because it might be the best defense against TCU. And so we'll find out on Saturday down in Fort Worth. But, Arizona could win that game when I look at it, and I look at, TCU. I mean, they're 6-4. They're having a good season. There's no doubt about that. But then I take a look at, outside of their passing numbers, and I take a look at who they played, who Arizona's played. Neither team has, had a schedule that you would say, oh, what's their signature win here? I mean, Arizona's signature win right now, I guess, is it Utah? I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
They beat NAU. That's the only team they've beaten with a winning record. And TCU's only beaten one team with a winning record this year. So that's why I think the Cats have a chance to go down there and win it. But, TCU's bowl eligible already. It's one of those new rivalry games. You really don't know because you don't play each other. What's the feeling going in? How do the players approach it? It's just different this year because of that. So I'm interested to see if Arizona, what they gain from the Houston game, and can they use that? Now they're going to have to step it up even more, but they've got a chance to go down there to win. If they play a clean game, that's always number one on the list, and that's one thing against Houston that was so important. They had 2 penalties in that game, and the turnovers were even. They just I'm sorry, they were +2 in turnovers in that game, and so They played a clean game, and that's something that they hadn't really done in that 5-game losing streak.
Yeah, and TCU is up and down as any team in the country. They lost to Houston and gave up 30 at home a few weeks ago. So who knows? You get the chance to spend a lot of time with Brent Brennan. You do the weekly radio show, and I'm sure you talk to him beyond that. What do you get the sense that his mood is like maybe now compared to beginning of the season? Is he still optimistic? Can you sense some frustration from him? What do you think?
Well, I think there was some frustration during that 5-game losing streak, and that's just natural. It's difficult when you've been hit with a number of injuries they've had at the key positions. You lose your best defensive player, you lose your two safeties. They've had guys banged up on the defensive line. The offensive line has been, every week it seems to be something different in that department. Noah Fafita was not as sharp as he was a year ago. There's no question about that. His completion percentage has been down, although now recently it's started to get better again. So I think I don't know if frustration is the right word, but I could certainly sense that he was disappointed in the way things were going at that point. Like I said, they could still win their last two games, and that would probably rescue the season. He and we talk a lot, and it goes back to that thing about the expectations of being 10-3 last year, and then everybody are in the preseason top 25, and people think, okay, you're just going to roll out the carpet and we're going to do it again, and it hasn't worked out that way. I think for a variety of reasons, change of staff, transfer portal, injuries, etc. So, if they finish 5-7 and beat Arizona State, for example, you guys know how that is. Whoever wins that game, that kind of saves their season if they're having a bad year. If Arizona goes 6-6, hey, they go to a bowl game. If they lose their last two games, I think, there's going to be a lot of disappointment amongst Wildcat fans that they could not at least, get back to a bowl game again.
Our last question for you, Brian, since we're not going to have you on next week to talk ASU, we'll talk a little bit about it now. It seems like one of the common denominators in this rivalry is typically when there's an upset, it's Arizona beating ASU. And we didn't think it going into the season, but it would certainly at this point be an upset if Arizona were to win that game, even though it's in Tucson. Your time covering the team, 2016, 2011, a lot of examples in the 80s. Is there been a common factor in a seemingly inferior Arizona team beating a seemingly better ASU team?
Yeah, I couldn't come up with a formula because there's been some strange things that have happened in the game, muff punt returns, just crazy things that have gone on in that series that there's nothing that I could draw a circle around and say, well, this is why it's happened. I just think, again, because of the rivalry, that both teams are going to be high energy. The effort is going to be over 100%. I think it comes down to, who plays the smarter game. Sometimes that's it. And you know how that goes. You get into those rivalry games, and sometimes you don't play smart. And so I think if Arizona's going to win, that would have to be number one on their list. How do they tackle Cam Scadaboo? That's another thing on their list. But, we'll find that out in another week. So, I've seen too many games, like you said, where the lesser team has beaten the better team. And so I would say the same thing going into this one. Arizona State should win it based on their record, but that doesn't mean they will, because rivalry games don't turn out that way.
Do you really think there's something to that whole thing? You can maybe not throw the records out, but the records don't matter. What on paper doesn't matter as much, specifically when it comes to rivalry games.
Oh, I think so. I mean, like I said, and you guys know this. I mean, the history of this rivalry, like you said, there's been many games when Arizona's had the worst record and won the game. And what year was it when the Sun Devils came down here and all they had to do was beat Arizona to go to the Rose Bowl? And the Wildcats probably had no business winning the game, and they did, simply because it comes back to the rivalry, and that's it. So, I hope it's a good game. That's what you always hope for. I'll add this though. Depending on how Arizona's season ends here, Sun Devils won 3-9 last year, first year of a new coaching staff, and now they sit at 8-2. Arizona's in the first year of a new coaching staff. They've got 4 wins. And so if things don't work out for them this year, I think that's one thing I try and caution fans on is that, things can turn around. And to ASU's credit, they've turned it around from one season to another, and Arizona could do the same thing.
That's a great point. I want one more history lesson from you, if you don't mind. I know you've said in the past on the show, I always think Arizona has a chance to win the games that I call. Has there ever been a game that stands out, a football game, where you said Wildcats aren't going to win today under any circumstances, and they pulled the upset? What's the one that comes to mind right off the bat?
Oh, that they pulled the upset. Oh, boy. Nebraska Fiesta Bowl, the first one. in San Diego. They lost the second time.
Oh,
there,
Holiday
but,
Bowl. Holiday Bowl. Yeah.
Holiday Bowl. Thank you.
Yeah.
Holiday Bowl in San Diego.
Yeah, we don't talk about the second one.
No.
Yeah, we don't talk about the second one. But the first one, yeah, that was like, oh, come on. It's Nebraska. I mean, this is like the blue blood of college football. I mean, and I just remember going, getting to the stadium, and the parking lot was full of Nebraska fans, and they asked me to come down and do their pregame show with them. And I go down there, and they've got a stage in the parking lot. There were 2,000 people sitting there watching a radio show before the Holiday Bowl, and I'm just like, wow. I was thinking of that Fiesta Bowl, the Miami victory over Miami at the Fiesta Bowl was probably another one where, they were kind of the bad boys of football at that point, and Arizona won that one handily. So those are the first two that come to mind that I probably thought to myself going into the game. I'll tell you, the other one was the game at Miami. That was early, I think, in Dick Tomey's career. Arizona had come off a tie at Oregon State, if I remember right. And Oregon State was bad. And we had to fly to Miami to play the Hurricanes. And I just remember on the flight down there making notes thinking we're going to have a lot of time to fill in the second half when, Arizona's out of this game. And they lost, I think it was 1 point. Steve McLaughlin missed a field goal by about 4 inches. Otherwise, Arizona would have won the game. And it kind of turned things around for them. I mean, you lose and it turns because you go on the road and beat, arguably one of the best teams in college football at that time.
September 26th, 1992, Miami 8, Arizona 7. There it is. At the previous year that Miami won the national championship, I believe it was 36-9. Or that Miami 91 team was great. And then 92, 8-7 final. You don't see very many of those, but that was something. What about the one last one? What about the Washington game? And I think it was 91. Washington was number one. Did you think that Arizona had a chance going to that game?
Well, I always think in conference games because I think there's somewhat of an equalizer there because your opponent to some extent. And so, no, that one didn't shock me. Maybe because it was more decisive than I thought. I mean, Arizona really kind of controlled that game from start to finish. And so, I mean, you're surprised, but at the same time going in, like I said, anytime you play a conference foe, I think there's something there that always gives you a chance.
Brian, always good catching up with you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again during basketball season.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you.
Discover more Play for All at Harrah's Auction Casino.
Hi, folks. Here are your drinks.
Where having fun means racking up reward credits with the Caesars Rewards loyalty program that can be redeemed for food, free play, hotel stays, and more. Not only here in the city of Maricopa, but also at more than 50 Caesars properties coast to coast. From Harrah's Las Vegas to Caesars Palace in Atlantic City. What are you waiting for? Play for All at Harrah's Auction Casino, the official sponsor of Play.
Great to catch up with Brian Jeffries. Always an entertaining interview, and I enjoyed hearing some stories about the past of some unexpected games that we talked about there at the end. But his insight was also quite good. All right, Shane, it's time for picks. You were right on the Arizona basketball spread. We're going to keep that separate. We'll total those points later. We both got 3 points. I hit my upset special, Air Force over Oregon State. What is your upset special? You're trailing me by 3 in football picks this year. What is your upset special this week?
Yeah, like I said, I should have gone with Pitt last week to cover against Clemson. They didn't get the win, but they covered. But not a lot of attractive options this week. So I'm going to actually go with Pitt this week as an 8.5 point underdog at Louisville. The thing is a very even matchup. And I think did you see the way Louisville lost at Stanford last week?
Yeah.
It was just crazy. I mean, with 50 seconds left, they're up 7 and Stanford's facing a 4th down and they find a way to lose in regulation. I think that kind of a loss, especially against a bad team, is just demoralizing.
So bad.
Yeah, it was bad. And I think Pitt's legitimately good. So I'm going to take Pitt on the road.
Last week, you took West Virginia against Baylor. Baylor's on fire, and they play Houston this week. You know what to do. I'm going West Virginia +3 at home against UCF. I'm still not buying the UCF renaissance, and I think West Virginia is still a good enough team based on what I saw from them against Arizona the other week.
We're swapping this week.
We're swapping this week a little bit. Yeah. All right. How about Indiana at Ohio State, number 5? Hoosiers, shocking to say that, at the number 2 Buckeyes. Ohio State favored by 13.5. May have some offensive line troubles if their starting center is out as he got hurt in practice potentially today. We'll see how that plays out. But Ohio State laying 13.5. Is that too many, Shane?
Oh, the offensive line depleted maybe, but I would love to take Indiana here, but I can't pick against Ohio State and Columbus even with their injury issues. Ohio State's played at least 2 games or 2 teams as good or better than Indiana has played it all this year, and this will be by far Indiana's toughest test of the season. Would love to see it be a great game. Would love to see Indiana go in there and continue their story and get the upset, but I'm going to take the Buckeyes, and I think they win by at least 2 touchdowns.
I do too, Shane. Indiana hasn't played anybody, and that's what it comes down to. I think Ohio State is battle tested, and Indiana is not. We haven't seen them play a ranked team yet, and I think the Buckeyes win by 3 touchdowns or thereabouts. How about Colorado? I mean, they're right in it here. A Colorado ASU Big 12 championship game would be like an utter disaster for us. Just how much I dislike personally. I dislike. They're a 3-point favorite at Kansas, who you correctly predicted to win at BYU. What do you think?
Yeah. Colorado and ASU, not for the Pac-12 championship, but for the Big 12. I think KU's win over BYU, even though I called it right, but I think it was more about BYU being due for a loss and a little about Kansas being able to finally not blow a 4th quarter lead. But as much as I hate to admit it, I think Colorado is probably the best Big 12 team at the moment. That can change week to week, but I think they keep rolling. So I'm going to take the Buffs to win and cover.
I'm going with Kansas in this one. I just think that Colorado's bubble is about to burst. And Kansas, this is their 4th ranked team that they've played in a row. And they've won their last 2. They beat last week, they beat BYU. Before that, they beat Iowa State. And they lost by 2 to Kansas State before that. I think they're going to take care of business at Arrowhead Stadium against Colorado. Notre Dame giving 15.5. The line's moved up to 15.5 against undefeated Army. I'm going with Notre Dame. As much as I want to take Army in this game, Shane, they have played like Indiana. They have played absolutely nobody. And I think they get rolled by 3 touchdowns. Give me Notre Dame to cover.
Yeah, against my better judgment, I'm going to go the opposite way. I'm excited for this game. I can't remember being this excited for an Army game, but I think it's going to be a close game between 2 very good defenses. Notre Dame and Army, they both allowed more than 14 points in a game just once this season. Although Notre Dame, like you said, has played better competition. I think that's going to be the difference. I think Notre Dame wins. But because I expect this game to be so low scoring, because both teams have outstanding defenses, I'm going to take Army to cover.
I made that one. I'm taking Notre Dame. All right, how about let's get to the one that we don't really want to talk about, Shane. But BYU, they blew it last week, and if they lose to ASU this week, the Sun Devils, with a win next week over Arizona, are 1 step away from the college football playoff, which is gross to think about. So here it is, Shane. ASU -3. Against BYU at home. Which way do you lean?
Yeah, I know it pains us to see ASU play such a meaningful game this late in the season because we thought it was going to be our team that it was going to, but it is what it is. There's just something about that team right now. In terms of talent, they're probably in the middle of the Big 12, but they keep finding ways to put it together. They maximize it, greater than the sum of their parts, all those cliches. I think BYU responds well to its first loss of the season. I think it's going to be a good game. I think they're going to play better than they did against Kansas. But I'm just not going to pick against the Sun Devils right now. I'm going to take them to win and cover, and I think there's going to be a lot on the line for them when they visit Tucson after Thanksgiving.
ASU beat Kansas at home 35-31. ASU beat UCF at home 35-31. ASU will beat BYU at home 35-31.
Fair enough.
I know you were wondering how I was going to land the plane there. I think I did. Okay, there we go. Arizona-TCU, Shane. Let's start with football. TCU's giving 11.5 to the Wildcats. I guess I'll start. I just don't see Arizona shutting down this TCU passing game. I think it will be ugly on Saturday. I'll just keep it simple. TCU 38, Arizona 17.
I'll go a little more in depth. TCU might be the most random team in the Big 12. They followed up a double-digit home loss to Houston with wins over Utah and Texas Tech. They're about as unpredictable as it gets. So from that perspective, if the bad TCU shows up, Arizona's got a chance. TCU's a good offensive team, an average defensive team. Josh Hoover leads the Big 12 in passing yards, but he's not a mobile quarterback, which does seem to bode well for Arizona. They've had a lot of trouble with mobile QBs. If Noah Fafita can take care of the football and get it out quickly on passing plays, which he did a decent job of against Houston, they have a shot. TCU is also one of the worst teams in the Big 12 against the run, so that could open things up for Quali Conley. The question for Arizona is whether Houston, again, was just that bad last week.
They were.
and or if Arizona sort of put it together and will be more competitive going forward. I sort of think it was more on the Houston being very bad. We did a little Twitter poll or X poll, and 2/3 of the people said, yeah, it was more Houston bad than Arizona good. I tend to agree. I'm going to take TCU to put away Arizona by at least the middle of the fourth quarter, maybe sooner. Horned Frogs 30, Wildcats 17.
Hey, if Arizona only gives up 30 this week, that might be a win. Defense played great. I don't want to take that away from them against Houston, but Houston looked like a high school offense. It was a joke. They were a joke. But getting a goal line stand on 4th and 1 at the goal, that was cool to see. I just think they're about to get exposed once again. I hope I'm wrong. Would love to be playing for a bowl game against ASU and to ruin their aspirations. Well, I hope their aspirations are ruined this week. All right, let's talk about the big one. Friday night, I think it's 8:30, Duke, Arizona. Wildcats won this game last year on the road. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Caleb Love kind of has Duke's number. Shane, my best judgment says that Duke is going to win this game by, 10 or so. But last week, I told you on the show, I said, I want to pick Arizona. My heart's kind of telling me to do it. And I went against them in football. And they went out and had a big win. Give me something like Arizona 87, Duke 84. I don't know why Arizona's going to win this game by 3, probably as an underdog, but I'm going to go with it. Please back me up.
Well, and like you said, they haven't lost 2 in a row under Tommy Lloyd, so there's that. But the big question is whether Arizona has a matchup problem with Cooper Flagg, and I know that sounds like a duh kind of statement, but they do. Do they have anyone who can properly match up with someone like him? But even if Flagg goes off for something like 26 and 11, like he did against Kentucky, he can't beat Arizona by himself, as we saw when Kentucky limited everyone not named Cooper Flagg to 36.5% shooting from the field, and they beat Duke. Arizona's got to be smarter, more disciplined on defense, whether they're getting the whistles or not. They got to shoot better from 3. We haven't talked about that. They're just set 27.4% from 3-point range this season. They were 4 of 23 against Wisconsin. They don't have a lot of elite 3-point shooters, but they got to be better than that. Home crowd always helps. And we've seen so many times, Eric, when McKale will help Arizona pass the finish line in games like these. And I think Arizona is going to be a very good team again this season. They're going to be competitive come March, but it might take them more than one game to work out the kinks we've seen so far. So I hope you're right, but I'm going to go Duke 84, Arizona 80.
Duke 84-80. All right. I mean, listen, I hope you're wrong. I think this is a game that would make us, as I said earlier in the show, make us forget about everything that we saw last week, or a lot of what we saw last week. So I want to thank Brian Jeffries for joining us. Great to catch up with him. He will be doing, presumably, the double header this week, basketball on Friday night and football on Saturday afternoon. Best of luck to him in that less than 24-hour span. That's going to be wild. So for Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. Thanks for listening. And as always, bear down.